like to welcome our fourth artist career workshop. This is part of our arts and advocacy video library, which you can find on our website that I posted in the chat, racialjusticeart.org. Now I would like to welcome Walker Esner. They're a photographer from New York City. He spent the beginning of his career making editorial and commercial portraits and teaching photography to high school and college students. He shifted into the world of post-production and retouching and editing for large photo studios.
Cool, thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time. Yeah, so basically this is a little class where I'll be talking about how to take the best possible photo of your work with the tools you have available. Because of the time we have, I'll be going pretty quickly through documenting 2D and 3D work. But you can ask questions at the end about shooting installations and exhibitions and stuff if you're interested in that. And so to do the moves I'll be talking about, it'll require having a decent cell phone camera and the Adobe photography plan. All right, so, well, obnoxiously, I like to just do a quick thing by saying that the best bet is to just hire a photographer. We're lovely and groveling for work. And I'm going to go over techniques for the layman with the least amount of equipment. But of course, each piece of work and each environment is pretty unique, and a professional will have the best gear and should be able to properly evaluate the circumstances for optimal results. If you ever do go this route, I would recommend sending cell phone photos of your work and asking to see photos of similar work to yours. And I'd be happy to talk more about hiring someone and rates and stuff if anyone is wondering about that kind of stuff. But obviously you're here because you want to do this on your own. And at the very least, going through these methods can help streamline communicating with a photographer to give them a sense of how you want things done. All right, so the format of this lesson is I'll be describing shooting methods with a cell phone camera and bouncing between these slides and screen sharing, Lightroom and Photoshop. I'll go over photographing 2D work inside, then outside, then show you the easiest way to edit these in Lightroom and Photoshop. And then we'll get into shooting 3D work, also inside and outside, and then work on editing those. And then we'll do a Q&A where you can come at me with specific questions about your setup and your work. Then also the PowerPoint that you can hopefully see on the screen share is going to just be available for you to reference. And it has step-by-step guides on how to just maneuver in Lightroom and Photoshop. So you don't have to write anything down. And it literally goes through like every button to press. So you can just watch it occur and you'll have notes. So the bare necessity for doing this is a phone with a decent camera, Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, which is $10 a month. And if you want to go super cheap, you can get it for free for a month. And when you go to cancel, they normally will offer you another free month. So you could kind of cram if you have a plan, you can kind of cram it in without paying for it. You also need a gray card and a white card. One level up in quality would be to have a tripod and an app on your phone to manually adjust the camera. And then the next level from that in quality would to have a decent SLR. And if you want to print these images, it's sort of hard to get around having an actual camera. And the best possible setup would be to have a camera and strobes to give you the most control and consistency in your light. So I'll try to do this quickly, but there are So different light has different color temperatures. It's measured in kelvins. Direct sunlight is around 5,000 Kelvin. An overcast day is around 6,500 K. And the interior lights in a house are about 3,200 K. Strobes for photography are balanced to sunlight. These numbers aren't super important, but it's all to say that every kind of light has a unique temperature, and for our purposes does not play well with the other light. When people shoot with analog cameras, they need different film depending on the light source. Now our digital cameras do a pretty good job of white balancing for a scene in front of them, but they have minimal latitude when it comes to color temperature. So white balancing is when the camera tries to figure out what the color temperature of the light is in a scene. It happens automatically with a cell phone camera. So to see it work during the day, turn on some overhead lights in a room with a window in it. Then you can fill your frame with the window, then shift your frame to a section of the room that is more lit by the overhead lights. And you'll see the scene change from too warm to more neutral colors. Then if you move the frame the other way and out the window, it'll look too cool before the white balance is evaluated and it becomes more neutral. If your photo includes light from the sun along with indoor light, your camera won't know how to deal with this. It'll tend towards one or the other, and it'll cause a section of the photo to be incorrectly balanced, giving it a color cast. So our move for shooting your work is to pick one type of light source and doing your best to exclude the others. It also leads me to recommend you buy more stuff. A gray card, which is a tool you can use to more accurately hone the color balance of your photo without relying on the camera's white balance function to decide for you. At the beginning of my shoots, once I have dialed in the lighting and gotten the exposure where I want it, I will take a photo of this gray card here in the exact same lighting conditions as the work I'm going to shoot. Then once we get into post-production in Lightroom, I can tell the program, hey, this is a neutral color, so adjust according to this. It's quick to do and it's more reliable than letting the camera figure it out. So next is choosing a background and sticking to it for all your photos is a big deal in this situation. I'm going to show you a few options for shooting your work, and you should try to think about how they are applicable to you depending on the equipment you own, what kind of space you have access to, and what sort of look you're going for. The most important advice I can impart is that you choose the look and the lighting and the background you're going to use, and you just stick to it. It's better to have mediocre photos that are consistent than a portfolio of work that's all over the place. Okay, so shooting 2D work inside. So if you're inside, use one kind of light source to avoid color casts. Ideally, you should have two lamps with the same type of light bulb. And then you're going to position these at about 45-degree angles on either side of the piece and slightly higher than its top. What this does, if the lights are the same brightness and distance apart on either side, is it'll mitigate the shadows and evenly light the piece. You can wait until dark or put your shades down or just stay away from the windows altogether. And this will reduce those color casts we're trying to avoid. If you're shooting in a space with big windows, it's basically like shooting outside, which I'll show you after this. So notes for shooting indoors is to wipe your phone's lens off before you start. Photograph your gray card in the same lighting conditions, like I mentioned. Getting parallel with the piece and using the phone's grid function in the settings. On your camera phone, you can tap the selection of the frame you want to expose for. And if you have a tripod, use the phone's camera timer function, which will reduce the chance of a blurry photo. If you don't have a tripod and you're shooting on a phone, you can just hold the phone with two hands and brace your elbows against your chest to keep it steady. And then you can use the volume control button on the phone as a shutter instead of the button on your screen, which also helps to keep it steady. So here's the lighting setup I use for these examples inside. And so you can shift your light around a bit to see how the shadow is affected. And for your own understanding, it can be useful to shut one off to notice the harsher shadow. Then watch the spot and turn the light back on, and you'll see the shadow open up. Right. I'm going to go over 2D outside, and then we'll go into editing these. Outside, a fully overcast day is actually more optimal for shooting. Clouds diffuse the sunlight and make shadow areas a little less dramatic. So find a place where the piece can face the light, and then do what you can to get parallel with the piece. Lean your piece up against something, and then you'll use a white card to bounce the light of the sun onto the piece at an angle which will reduce the shadows. So kind of like this. All right, so now I'm gonna pop into Lightroom. And Lightroom is a extremely powerful tool, and it can be used for organizing and categorizing images, tethered image capture, shooting from your computer with your camera, culling images, image resizing, and then for our purposes today, editing images individually and globally. So again, in the PDF you'll get, there's just a super detailed instructions on how to do all of these steps when you're on your own. So I'm going to just jump into editing, and editing a 2D piece shot inside and outside are the same maneuvers basically in Lightroom. All right, so here we go. So here is my my gray card that I shot for this 2D piece. And I'm just going to use this eyedropper, and I'm going to click on the gray card. And then selecting the actual image I'm going to edit, I will sync these, the treatment and profile and the white balance. And that will give me the white balance of the gray card. So the first maneuver I do, this all takes place on this side. There's these sliders here. I'm going to go down to this section that says transform, and I'm going to use these guided tools. And so clicking one corner, basically I want to make the piece just horizontal and parallel with the frame. So I click the top corner, and I'm going to just drag down to the bottom corner at the angle of the piece. And then I'm going to do that to the other side. And then it kind of pops into place there. I'm going to do the same thing for the horizon lines. Enter. And then I'm going back up here to these sliders, and I'm going to work pretty much just in these sliders. So I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit, increase the contrast a bit, pull down the highlights slightly, shadows up, whites up a little, blacks down a little. Then texture up slightly, clarity up a tiny bit, vibrance up a tiny bit, and then saturation down slightly. So this gets me kind of close to where I want to go. And then I'm going to select the image here, right click on it, and then send it into Photoshop. Which is jump to another screen. So here it is. So while Lightroom is working on images in an overarching way, Photoshop is for more dramatic edits. And in here, I'm going to cut the piece out basically and just drop it onto a white background. So we're going to select the piece with basically we're just going to use one tool in here, which is the polygonal lasso right here. And so I'm going to I'm just going to tools here. Too many more. Okay. So I am going to use this polygonal lasso, and basically each time I click the mouse, it's going to create an anchor point. And I'm just going to move around the piece and just click slightly inside and just go along its edges. And yeah, as I click, again, creating anchor points. It's kind of fast, so it'll be a little sloppy, but you will get. Oops, I closed it. I'm just going to add to this selection. Okay, so I grabbed the piece here. Then under select, there's a section called modify, and I'm just going to feather it by 1. And then I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to duplicate the background. And then, so what just happened is I just chopped it out. So then on my background copy, I am going to go into edit and fill. And this is going to give me an option to fill it with, you can fill it with any color basically, but I'm going to fill it with white. So there we go. Then the final maneuver in here is to select the layer that the cutout piece is on. And then down here, there's an effects button, and I'm going to add a drop shadow. And here's the drop shadow options here. So you'll see if I unpreview it, see what happens. It just added drop shadow here. I'm going to move the angle to about 90 degrees. So that'll point it down. And this looks pretty good to me. You can play with the distance of the shadow and the spread. You can play with these sliders and kind of, depending on the size of the piece, make it look a little more realistic. So I'm going to okay that to feel good about it. And then I'm going to save it and close it. And then in Lightroom, it has created a new file here. So I'm just going to do a couple more tweaks here. I'm going to just crop it, which you can do using the R button. And that looks pretty good. I might increase the exposure. So you can like work these sliders again once you've gotten it on white. Just increasing the contrast here. The exposure. And so I feel pretty good about this. And it is the same, it's exactly the same deal with exterior images shot outside. I can go over that again if anyone's interested in Q&A, but I'm just going to jump into shooting 3D work. Okay. And so you'll see in this PDF, it's literally everything I just did for you guys to work on your own. Okay, so shooting sculptures inside requires the same setup as photographing 2D work, but because the shapes tend to be a little more complicated, we're not going to be knocking out the background. So my recommendation is to get smaller pieces off the ground using a nice looking tabletop. It's best to shoot in front of a clean background. A white wall is great, or hanging up a large sheet of paper to create a seamless, or a canvas drop cloth can look pretty good as well. So try your best to allow some distance from the wall and the piece. And you'll need 2 light sources, again, set up about 45 degrees on either side. And the lights should be higher than the piece. And you can move them up and down, closer and further away, to see how the shadows are falling because behind the piece. And when you're shooting sculptures, it's okay to have shadows. You'll just want to be mindful of where they are, which requires shifting your lights and just watching what happens with the shadows. And again, shooting away from the windows, or if you have big windows, just use those exclusively. So shooting 3D work outside, you'll definitely want a white card to bounce the light of the sun into the shadow areas of your piece. And again, because you won't be knocking out the background, you want to plan on using a background that exists in reality. So try to find a plain, non-distracting background, as these are going to be a part of the image. Also, because it will be complicated to return to the same spot and have the exact same lighting conditions from the sun, you're going to want to shoot all your 3D pieces the same day for the sake of consistency. So you want to think about a plan before you jump into this. Maybe consider photographing a full series of work together that will have the same background. Okay, so back in Lightroom. Again, here is my, I'm actually backtrack. This is edited already. So here's my image. Here is my gray card. Again, up here, I'm going to use this color picker to pick a neutral tone. And then I'm going to grab my image and then sync the white balance and the treatment and profile. Okay. So here's our image. I am going to start by cropping it just to get a better sense of how much background I'm going to need to edit. All right. So yeah, it's a similar maneuver, but we're just in Lightroom now using these sliders. We're not going to knock out the background. So I'm going to increase the exposure. I'm going to increase the contrast a bit. Highlights up, shadows up, whites a little down, blacks a little down. Texture up. You can go a little more on the sculptures with the texture. Clarity up slightly. Vibrance up a little bit, and saturation down a little bit. And then the only other maneuver I use for sculptures usually is if you roll down here, there's this effects section. And if you can create a little vignette, which helps when we're not knocking out the background. It just kind of helps to send the focus towards the piece. And then I am noticing there's some like wrap on the background. And I'm going to use other tool, which is like a spot removal tool, which you get to by the letter Q. And I'm just going to color in these ratty little spots on the wall here. And it does a pretty good job of just deciding how to take care of them. Okay, so there is that. And again, the exterior, I'll just do this again really quickly. This is the final version, but this is the piece I shot outside. There's the white card that I used to bounce. And I'll just do the same thing really quickly to ingrain it a little bit. I'm gonna just crop. It's up, so I'm not getting any of the white card. So I'm gonna bring the exposure up slightly, contrast up, highlights up, shadows up a little more, whites down, blacks a little down, texture up, clarity slightly up, vibrance a little bit up, and saturation slightly down. Yeah, there we go. And then I'll add this little vignette here. Narrow the focus at the piece. So those are that is pretty much the deal. Yeah, it's basically as little bit of Lightroom and Photoshop I can show you. So I can open up the floor to questions if anyone wants to talk about their particular work. Yeah.
Thank you. Walker, can you say a little bit about hiring a photographer? I know we're here for the DIY, but I was interested in your opinion on both what tips do you have for hiring a photographer, I guess for looking and then the hiring, and then what are typical rates? So those are three questions.
Sure. Yeah. So for hiring, obviously it's pretty localized. You're going to want someone who has the equipment to come to your workspace, just because you don't want to be commuting with your work. So that's a great question to start off with. I tend to get most of my clients through other clients. So I would say poking around and asking other friends in the area who they use, and if you like the work that's on their website, finding out who they use. And then I think I mentioned it's great for us photographers shooting artwork to just get some kind of imagery of your work, just to prepare as well as we can. So yeah, just like some like cell phone photos of a few of the pieces that you're hoping to get photographed will just kind of streamline things. And then in terms of personally, what I charge is for newer clients, I charge $75 per final image with a minimum of 4 images. And then I also, if I charge for travel and stuff, if I'm going further than like 40 minutes or so.
And do you think do most photographers charge per image, not per hour?
It really it depends. I've heard both situations. I think most often with photographing artwork, it tends to be, like, 10 image, it'll be like a package where, it's like someone doesn't want to travel and do a full setup for shooting 2 things. So they just want to make sure there's like enough work for them. But I think it's mostly per image, per final image. And then also just one last important thing to ask about is making sure you get the size files that you want. So if obviously everyone's like getting these pictures for their website and Instagram and social media and stuff, but also if you're ever going to print anything, you want to make sure to ask for the high res files, so you have them as well.
Yeah, we're going to run a talk on organizing your files as well, and I know like I just started having like a 300 DPI version and a 72 DPI version, and having those just ready to go makes some of the other work that we do, like applying to things, a lot smoother.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's super easy, and you can actually and I think I included this in that PDF, but in Lightroom, you can just grab an image and export it at any size you want. So you can very quickly, with this program, make a web size and a high res, and it'll just spit it out. But yeah, that's important to have both.
Before we get to this other question, I wanted to also ask, so I mean, communication is always key with dealing and hiring anyone. What are some of the pitfalls that should be cleared up, before hiring a photographer? I know like travel is one of them. What are some
Yeah,
other issues that might come?
yeah, I would definitely ask about, any potential rate increase that might occur if you live super far away and they're going to crank up the price for that. I would also, it's important, especially with like the artist photographer interaction. It's super important to be at the studio you're shooting at, and it's really helpful to point out the important parts of the piece, basically. Oftentimes I will send final files back, and the artist is not quite happy with like a particular color that occurred. And I, as a photographer shooting someone else's work, never have as much time as they do with their work. So just, and it's not a big deal to change and tweak colors and stuff, and I feel like it's super important to look at what you've been sent and look at your piece and make sure it's what you want, and and there's always a way to get it to where you want. There's like lots of, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what kind of post production can be done. So you can, if you're not satisfied and you paid for photography, you should just stay on them and make sure the colors are right, the contrast is right,
I've done a
everything.
lot of photoshopping of artworks. It's
Yeah, yeah,
changed
sure.
things a lot. Amy wants to know, what is the gray for the gray card? And I know you had a link in the PDF, but she's heard cool gray #2. Is there?
Oh, no, not cool. No, it's a medium gray. I think it's called 18% gray. So it's not warm or cool. It should be completely neutral. And yeah, if you look up like, there's a link in the PDF for a particular one, but if you look on Google or Amazon, if you just do photography gray card, there'll be a million options that are probably $10 or less. But yeah, it's 18% gray and fully neutral.
When you're talking about like what is important for you and your piece, have you done like detail shots too? Like, are there any tricks for detail imagery?
Yeah. I would say, I mostly was talking about when you're shooting to have the lights at 45 degree angles on either side, and that neutralizes the shadow as best you can do with two lights. But if you are honing in on a particular section, a detail of sculpture, say, um, get in there with your camera and then start moving the lights around a little bit, and you'll see that the shadows will move, and you don't necessarily, if you're dealing with one little section of the work, you don't necessarily need to be mitigating the shadows of the entire piece. So you can shift your lights closer, you can use one light, you could shut one of them off. So I would just recommend first locking in what section you want to focus on in your photo, and then using your lights to and kind of move them around slowly and see what's happening with the shadows.
Another question I have is some works are nightmares to photograph because of glare.
Yeah.
Like I know, like I've done some all black, like mostly black paintings or
Mhm.
paintings with varnish on them.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and and having the two lights definitely helps, but anything else when you're having a lot of glare?
Yeah. Yes. So shooting super reflective stuff or really dark stuff, it is super important to block out all the other light that you're not using, basically. So like any window light, just any other color cast that can be coming in, because those will potentially reflect onto the piece. And then I promise this is true because I've spent so many hours doing it. Using those two lights, it may not necessarily be at 45 degrees, but there will always be a spot if you move the lights further around the piece where things will stop reflecting. And it might be almost parallel with the piece, but there is always a place where it's either like your lights are like right next to your camera on either side, and you just got to move them and you got to look, and there will always be a spot, but it is annoying. It's like you got to find it. But
When you
we're doing, sorry, like a professional photographer would be doing the same thing. It's just trial and error, moving the lights around to find that sweet spot. Sorry.
when you have your lights, I saw they seem like they were just lamps. Is there
Yeah.
a light bulb that's better to use or not?
It doesn't really matter. Like more light output can be a little more helpful, but if you have that gray card, which will reduce and just neutralize those color casts, it doesn't really matter if it's a warm light or a cool light or pretty neutral, as long as they're both the same.
Mhm.
That is, yeah, as long as they're the same bulb, that's the most important thing.
Hmm. Yeah. The other question I had is in the beginning, you were talking about an app for the phone to do something with the
Yeah, basically it's there's a million of them, and I have a link to one
yeah.
that I was just a cheap one, but basically it overrides when you open your phone, um you just you just have an option to click somewhere, and then you can drag up and down
Mhm.
to affect the um, exposure. But there's apps that will override the system, the phone system, and you just have more leeway. You can like really dial it brighter or darker.
And what
Um,
kind of exposure do you want?
um, you basically you don't want anything to blow out or be too dark.
Mhm.
So it's most important that things don't blow out, and then you're gonna wake up those darker parts with the lighting that you're using.
My other question, not sort of a question, but when you said wipe the camera lens, it really got, I mean, that's like the first thing I always do, and I can't say how important it is to always wipe your both your phone camera lens, and then when you're doing a Zoom with someone, I also recommend wiping your computer camera lens so you don't have that foggy look to you.
Yeah.
But we forget about these lenses that they need to be cleaned constantly. Uh,
Yeah,
for your
especially,
photo,
your
do you
phone.
use something or just like a fabric?
Yeah, I just use my shirt usually. Yeah, they're just, they're our cell phones, so they've been in our pocket all day. There's probably lint and crap on them. So
Mm,
yeah,
got it.
goes a long way.
Yeah, a long way. And also the camera on your front, you can also clean that one. All these
Yeah.
cameras, lenses can be cleaned. Can you talk for a second about the difference between a cell phone camera and an SLR?
Yeah,
Like
sure.
a real camera?
Yeah. So speaking as generally as I can, there is more room to affect the settings, basically. So you have control of cell phone cameras do not have an app, they have a fixed aperture. And SLRs, you can change the aperture, and the larger the aperture, the more light that comes in and the less depth of field there is. So there's more, it's not with 2D work, doesn't make a big deal, but with 3D work, it's pretty affecting because you can knock the background's focus out much more easily. So yeah, as generally as possible, I would say that there's just more room to play, and then there's a little. It's not even a tough, like the like latest iPhone has a fabulous camera, and most people wouldn't even be able to tell the difference, but there's a difference in the latitude of what you can photograph from dark to light, basically. So there's just more space so if I'm like so if you see in my office here, like there's some dark, over here. It's just getting pretty dark. And then at the window is blowing out here. So this is like a crappy digital camera. So if I wanted to fix this, like if I wanted to even things out, I would have to, put a light somewhere over here by this door to wake this up, and then be exposing more for this so that we bring this down, you can see out the window. So DSLRs, there's a little more room that it just inherently can, there's just more latitude. So you would be able to see more detail in these darker areas, and you'd be able to see, like, the detail in the curtains of the windows. Yeah.
And I gotta say, I mean, I have a DSLR I bought about 10 years ago now, but it was, like one of the top of the line, for consumers.
Yeah.
And I sometimes use it, but I really prefer the cell phones. It's just the point and shoot quality is or like the ability to not have to think of all the settings. Uh,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And they've gotten so good. I mean, it's like the imagery is pretty beautiful on the newer cell phones. So.
Does anyone else? So here's another question. Let's see. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So when photographing flat artwork, is it better to photograph against a white background or a black background? Mainly in consideration of glare.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Basically, it's your preference. I think it's a little easier to, if you're not using that method I described where you're like knocking out the background, in which case you can put any color, I put white in there, but you can put any range of color you could possibly want. If you want to just shoot it on the background that exists in reality, it tends to be a little white and lighter colors tend to be a little more forgiving in terms of the shift in gradient. So if there's like a little bit of light spilling over onto a darker background, you'll see that more readily, basically. So there'll be some, and it's not all the time, but often there'll be some gradient in the darker background. So it won't be like exactly one tone. And it's easier to get that one tone with lighter backgrounds.
And Simone, I will say also keeping in mind that when you apply to things, the standard is having a white background behind the work. That's just so when people are like a juried competition or something, that's just the standard of what is expected.
Mhm. But you can absolutely, if you just do the maneuver that I was describing, yeah, you could shoot it on. It doesn't really matter what the background is. You saw I shot that stuff outside with like just a piece of wood propping up the 2D piece. And you can, you cut it out and you can just put it on any colored background you want. So you can put it on black later, and that might look a little cleaner than shooting it originally on a black background.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Put them in the chat, or you can just ask away. We're going to be hosting this this on our website, and I will be emailing the group both this and the PDF. So you will all have it hopefully this week. And unless there's any more questions, I will let us all enjoy our Memorial Day.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all. Thanks so much, and I'll let you know when the next session we have is going to go live. But thank you so much, Walker. We really appreciated your time today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right. Bye, everyone.